Okay, it says we're on live, so we're waiting for people to join. My concern is that it currently says no attendees are in the room, so I'm going to put that on just so I can see that there are people joining. Yes, people are in, no problem. So now I'll go ahead and turn that back off. Okay, it looks like Mariah is connecting to the room now and we'll be able to see. She can see and hear the presentation. That's great. So I said we'd start right at the top of the hour, but we're going to give a couple more minutes for people to join in. It looks like we've got a large crowd for today, and it may take a few minutes for people to come in. I just encourage everybody who's on the line right now, send me a chat. Tell me where you are calling from and one word about the weather where you are today. I'll tell you, this is Karen Rawson. I think you can see my picture. And I'm calling in from California, but I ordinarily live in Texas. So making it out to California this time of year, when it's foggy and probably about 70 degrees outside, maybe 68, is just wonderful compared to Texas, where it'll probably get up into the 90s today. I'm actually wearing long sleeves. Oh my goodness, we have someone from the UK. We have Dimsey from UK. We have Missouri, Central Kentucky, Mumbai, Illinois, all the exotic places. Let's see, we have Greece. Oh, this is so much fun to see people. One from Houston, I know Ismail, and I see Elizabeth from Chicago and Eric from Illinois, Dale from DC Metro. Okay, it looks like we've got a good crowd on the phone. So let's go ahead and get started. My name is Karen Rawson, and I'm the Vice President at the DESARA Group. There's my smiling face, and I guess you can see me in the corner of the webinar as well. And this webinar is jointly presented by DQS and the DESARA Group. So I'll tell you a little bit about our company and then introduce my co-speaker today, Subrata Guha. The DESARA Group is a 10-year-old consulting company. We specialize in telecommunications industry. We do all kinds of industries, but most of our clients have tended to come from telecom, and we're working in information security in the New York area. We're experts at implementing management systems such as ISO 27001, ISO 9001. We've done the telecom standard TL 9000 quite extensively, and the various aspects of the NIST framework. But another thing that we do is internal audits on a contract basis. We can do regular, objective, comprehensive internal audits. We're not a certification body. So Open Kimono will tell you all about what we find with no consequences of a certificate at stake. And we can also do supplier audits and gap assessments. And then when something goes wrong, dig in and say, what happened with the management system that allowed this to happen? And now I'll turn it over to my co-presenter, Subrata Guha, to tell us about himself and about DQS.
Thank you, Karen. Hey, good morning, everyone. This is Subrata Guha. I am the Program Director for IT Certification Practice of DQS. I have been in the area of security and IT certifications for the last 20 years. I've been involved with the evolution of 27001 model from the time it was BS 7799 standard. DQS is a global certification body. It is a result of merger of two separate certification body. One is DQH GmbH. It's a German certification company founded in 1985 by German Association of Quality DGQ, which is the equivalent of ASQ of America, and Underwriters Laboratory UL's Management System Certification Services. And you are maybe aware that UL was founded in 1894, is a more than 100 years old legacy of quality and safety certification. In 2008, these two units decided to merge to form DQS Inc. to expand our global reach. And you can see in the pie chart right hand side that still UL is one of our major stakeholders, and other stakeholders involve DGQ and DIN. Our corporate headquarters is located in Buffalo Grove, which is outskirts of Chicago, and our president is Brad McGuire. Karen, next slide, please.
Okay.
So we offer certifications in multiple standards which are aligned to some verticals like automotive, aerospace, And there are also some standards like general quality management, environmental system certification, which cut across multiple areas. And one of our specialized area is doing an integrated management system audit, like ISO 27001 with 9001, or 14001 with 9001 and 27001. So that's a brief about our company. Let's dive into today's subject. The title of this webinar is Cybersecurity and 27001, and how one should approach implement a secure information security management system in your organization. So we'll spend a little time to clarify the difference and the similarities between cybersecurity and information security. Then we'll touch upon how information security is now creating a lot of business risks for your business, various approaches for implementing information security, brief comparison between the security standards offered by NIST and the ISO 27001, and then dive into the detail, which is the main focus of this webinar, is on the 27001 standard, its overview, the controls, how one should attempt to implement that, so implementation models, certification to the standards, and then talk a little bit about the next step. So after attending this seminar, if any one of your company is interested to go ahead and start a cybersecurity or security program, what are the logical steps next?
Okay, it looks like we've got everyone on the call. It's we're getting started, and I just want to say a couple of things before we get started about using the controls. We encourage you to chat your questions throughout the webinar. If you can notice, I'm gonna make my picture go away so that you'll definitely be able to see it. But in the lower right corner, you can just do the title, but the number will be better if you can look at the slide number and chat that to us, and we'll answer questions at the end. There are several questions about when you'll get a copy of the slide deck and the presentation, and that'll be sent out tomorrow, about 24 hours after the webinar. The point is to learn and be able to share this webinar information with your colleagues. So that's why we made a workbook, so that you can easily take notes rather than writing directly on copy of the slides. So I encourage you to invite others to use this link and sign up for the second webinar we'll have today, and to sign up so that we can include them in future webinars. Because as you'll see, information security is not just about the IT department. In fact, information security starts at the top, where senior management is supposed to put the practices in place and tie information security to the risks faced by the business, because management is supposed to avoid the risks. So this is a webinar where senior management can learn about current models and trends in information security management. And of course, we all expect IT leaders to be here, because they're the ones who will be responsible for the bulk of the technical changes that may need to be made. But they need to know that they've got the full organization pulling behind them, and that will give, if you've got everybody here in the different roles, including the technical staff that needs to make the changes to meet NIST or ISO 27001 requirements, we'll have everybody pulling on the same end of the rope. Now, DESARA Group and DQS both have high concentrations of quality professionals on our lists, because many have certified to the standard ISO 9001. Well, the good news is that if you're involved with 9001 or other standards based on Annex SL, you'll see a lot of things in ISO 27001 when we get into it in a few minutes, that you can leverage your skills with your current standard to help your business build an information security management system. And finally, sales professionals are often the ones who are rattling the cages, in addition to the IT folks, saying, we need to get standards in place, because we're seeing things in our contracts asking for information security management systems, and we don't know how to bid. We don't know how expensive it may be for us to get certifications and other requirements that we may need to meet. And all of these things are coming about because, as we've seen, when there's some sort of data exposure that your company is at risk of, confidential business information, your secrets, or the private personal information of your employees, or even of the people that you do business with, could be exposed. We've seen it in the news again and again. I mean, just think of the Equifax failure, where all of our Social Security information and credit information in the United States was divulged to hackers. Confidentiality is very important, but so is the integrity of data. Imagine yourself trying to solve a problem really and digging data out of the system, and you think you've solved the problem with all the information you're supposed to have, and what you have is corrupt data, part of the data, and you make bad business decisions, or you can't even get access at all. Availability of information in the event of a physical disaster or a hardware malfunction or anything that could block you, such as being completely shut out of the information due to a shutdown for a security risk, compromises availability. So having an information security management system is about ensuring confidentiality, integrity, and availability of information. And not all of that is compromised only by hackers getting into your product or into your systems. It can happen with very normal things happening within your business, with the way equipment is maintained or the way people treat and handle information. So all of those are compromises to your information. But let's look at what your company may have done and what other companies may have done based on risks to your information and the security systems that process it. Well, I'll tell you what some companies have done to put an information security management system in place to face those risks that we talked about, to confidentiality, integrity, and availability of information. First of all, it's having management on board, which is the answer to just about any kind of systems problem that we have. It has to start at the top with their planning and their oversight, their goals for what they expect information security management systems to achieve, and then to have measurements in place. That's one thing that many companies are doing when they put a management system in place. Another point, and this is something that various models ask for, is for your company to do systematic analysis and treatment of risks. Identify what could go wrong, figure out what you're doing to keep it from going wrong, prevention, and then finally, what are we going to do if it does happen? What's our plan B? Successful companies also have systematic investigations and corrections of security incidents. And by incident, I don't just mean the major hacking thing that makes the news. I mean the kind of even routine events, such as leaving computers unlocked, or leaving the back door propped open, leaving information in hard copy form where bad actors could have access to it, or somebody who's not supposed to. And certainly the kinds of incidents where somebody finds a vulnerability in a product or a system. Just like ISO 9001 and other standards ask, change management is very important within anything you do related to security. You'd be expected, if you were facing information security risks, to put methods of effectiveness in order, and also to treat this as a company-wide approach, just like you would treat quality or environmental concerns or safety. Treat this as a company-wide approach. It's not something that just IT does. Those are some of the things successful companies do. Now, you'll hear me use cybersecurity and information security interchangeably within this presentation. And so I don't look over at the comments and see people saying, oh, well, which is which. We just thought we'd put it out here that it depends on your point of view how much, if any, overlap there is between cybersecurity and information security. Some people say cybersecurity is a subset of the broader range of information security, and some people say it's the other way around. And some people say there's a big overlap or a small overlap. So I just ask, don't get hung up on the terms. The point is to protect information that connects to electronic systems, as well as all kinds of information and the things people may say, or the facilities and the equipment that supports the processing of information. Think of the kinds of risks, not just the fact that there could be a hacker who could get involved, but what would happen, the impact of any of these information security incidents, such as lost hardware or somebody busting into your system. Your business's very reputation is at stake, and if somebody's trying to get product from you or services from you at the time you have a breach, you could lose sales short-term, plus you could lose long-term just due to the reputation. And there may be long-term costs to cleaning up the mess, but so do your customers have problems. They may be missing orders being filled and have downstream impact in their own company, plus their own sensitive information, what they're buying and from whom they're buying it, how much they're buying could be at risk to outsiders who shouldn't have access, and they have a cost to clean up the mess. And we see that there's a domino effect. Whenever the public becomes aware of a problem, first of all, problems can be propagated, such as viruses going on through the system, but further lack of, oh my goodness. Okay, I'm getting I just had a terrible feeling right there that some people can't see the video, but I have the word from Mariah that she can see and hear the presentation. I apologize there. I just had a cold sweat break through me when I thought nobody could actually see the presentation. Okay. So this is where I wanted to hand it over to my co-presenter Subrata Guha from DQS. Remember, he's the certification body where we're the consulting company. And Subrata is going to talk about what some companies have done in greater detail about how they've handled cybersecurity in the past and what are the modern methods going forward with information security. Subrata?
Thank you, Karen. And sorry to hear that some of you are not able to see the presentation. It's a technical snag. So I'll try to talk slowly through it so that you can at least follow along with me. So why companies are going to implement the cybersecurity approach? Number one, it is customer driven. Some customer wants you to be certified or to follow some controls from NIST 853. They often send you a security questionnaire which you have to fill out. So it is a customer driven. Some companies are taking their own initiative as a policy to implement some security model so that they can increase their credibility, or it is simply a risk prevention, risk mitigation. So be proactive and adopt a security standard to overhaul their security posture. If you are in a business in some area where some regulations applies, for example, if you are your business you are dealing with health informations, then you have to comply with HIPAA privacy regulations. It's not an option, it is a mandatory thing. If you're a publicly traded company, you have to comply with SOX. SOX talks about the integrity aspect of your information security, which Karen was talking some time back. Now, with the recent launch of GDPR regulations, it's for the European Union, and if you are interacting with any organizations who are situated in EU, you may be subjected to GDPR compliance. So regulatory requirements are not optional, so you have to follow those. But there are some voluntary standards, and we'll mention two here, which are most commonly used, which is ISO 27001, which is an international standards from ISO on information security. And there are NIST standards where NIST provides the cybersecurity framework. It provides standards on NIST M853. It provides a subset standards for protection of CUI, which is 800-11, and so forth. So moving along.
Subrata, I got a request from somebody for you to speak more loudly. I hear you just fine, but if you'd just be sure to speak a little louder.
Okay, thank you for the feedback. So in this chart, what we are showing is we are talking about the NIST cybersecurity framework. So if you look at the graphics on your right-hand side, which is called the core of the framework, which says, and it is all about risk management. So the framework core, which talks about 5 key elements, you identify your risk. Having identified the risk, you have to protect your company. So in a way, protecting means you have to mitigate. So you have to identify some mitigating control to take care of the risk. Now, implementing control is not going to 100% guarantee you that you will not have any security events or incidents. So you need to have another mechanism to detect if in case anything going wrong. So it could be an event or it could be an incident. Event is someone is trying to hack into your system, or there are some weaknesses. Having identified that, you have to respond to that. If something, and if you have an event monitoring system, oftentimes we use a term called a false positive. So those require no actions, but there will be some events or incidents which will require some response from you. And in the event of a serious breach, or where you really have an incident where you have to shut down your system or you have to relocate to another location, then there should be a recovery process so that you still make sure that your availability is not impacted much. So with this code, it also helps you to provide you an implementation tier based on the maturity of your risk assessment. And they separated it in terms of four different tiers. Now, given in any situation, what you can do, you can analyze your current situation in terms of these five elements and say where you stand. Are you in the beginner's level or you're intermediate? So they call this separate four tiers is the partial, where you have no system at all. Then you are risk aware, the second tier, where you know about your risk but not able to do much about it. Third tier is repeatable, where you have a system of identifying risk and mitigate the risk. And fourth tier is adaptive, where you're able to change your risk posture based on the changing business scenario. So it is very important to know what is your framework profile. So where you stand today. If you know that in some elements you may be in tier one, some elements you are maybe in tier two, so that is your current profile. And then you can set a target. Then 1 year or 2 year down the line, you should be, or you plan to be at tier three or tier four. So that is why it is a helpful framework for that. Now let's get into the ISO 27001. On the right side, you see the cover page of the standard as it looks like. And this is the only certifiable standards available in the market. The title, although it says the information technology security techniques for information security management systems dash requirements. There are 12 different standards in the 27001 family, but you have to be careful that although they use the word standard, but none of those 11 documents has the word requirements at the end of it. So whenever it is a requirement, it's a standard for certifications. Now, like all ISO standards or any quality management systems, this is based on the plan, do, check, act principles. So when it comes to information security in the plan stage, what you do, you try to identify what's your risk, how you're planning to mitigate your risk, what are the objectives you have. Having set forward these plans in the do, where you do your regular risk management, vulnerability management, and then, sorry about it. Having implemented your risk mitigation plans, you have to have your monitoring and measurement mechanism where you do your event management, your audits, performance monitoring, assessments. And from there, any corrective actions are needed, it goes to the act phase to do your corrective actions. So this is your act. Next slide, please. So here is the overall standard of the NIST of the 27013. And some of you who are familiar with 9001 2015 model, you will see this is exactly the same structure which ISO is adopting to harmonize the various ISO standards. It starts from the top, which says the context of the organization, where you determine your organization level threats and opportunities. Then you have your leadership layer underneath that, which establishes the organization structure, roles and responsibilities, policies. In the planning phase for 27001, you take clues from the context of the organization, the business risks. It flows down here, and you try to understand that now how of these risks are related to the security risk. So that's where you are having a strategic alignment between your business risk and the security risk. Now, having known your risk posture at this level, you can set your target, you can identify the scope, and then you put the system into operations where you do your regular risk management, vulnerability management, incident management. Performance evaluations, here you are now monitoring that how effective your security controls are. Is it achieving their intended goal or something needs to be done? And any corrective actions identified here goes to your improvement cycle. So that's how it continues to grow. And you have a support layer underneath which talks about your document control, training, awareness, communications, and stuff like that. But what is unique about these standards, which are not there in any other ISO standards, it comes with Annex A, which gives you 114 controls, security controls divided into 14 different domains. Now, the reason for separating it is that when you do your risk assessment, you have to do a risk mitigation. And for risk mitigation, you have to pick and choose the controls which are applicable to your business from Annex A. Now, 27001 also gives you a flexibility that as an organization, you can write your own controls. You can adopt controls from any other security standards like NIST 853 or GDPR or PCI, or you name any other standards. So coming here, that's where it gives you a comparison between NIST 800 and ISO 27001. You see, both standards provide set of controls. Both standards are risk-based. But what is missing in NIST 853 is the left-hand portion of this diagram, which we call a management system, which helps an organization to self-sustain their improvement program and make sure that your system is effective. In a high-level comparison, you will see there is a lot of similarities, sometimes different names. Like ISO 27 says it is 14 domains, NIST 800 calls them a family. Now, why there are 18 families? Because some families have been broken into a number of different things. Like ISO controls everything under access management, whereas NIST split it up into access management and authentication. So it becomes two separate families. NIST also tend to be a little more prescriptive than ISO. For example, ISO says you need to have an access control system, but does not specify that how rigorous it would be. Whereas the NIST goes into the depth where if you are a moderate risk, you should have a two-factor authentication. Just an example of how prescriptive it gets to. And since it becomes prescriptive and a little more specific than ISO, it has more number of controls in it.
Okay, before I flip along, I want to interrupt here, Subrata, and say that this would be on page 3 of your workbook if you're following along. If you're following along and Subrata describes the difference between NIST and ISO 27001, you have the table there to fill in.
So this is a management system and the Plan, Do, Check Act, which I just explained some time back. So I think we can move on to the next slide. And here's a graphics which shows that how 27001 can be used as a foundation for any security management system. As I was talking in the previous slide, that you have an option to choose control from many standards. So when you choose these controls and you create a document, which is called a statement of applicability or SOA, and which is the guiding document for any information security management systems, which basically defines which is the scope of your information security management system or SOA. So here you see that you can have a set of controls, you do your risk assessment, you can take your customer requirements, you do a business impact analysis, and then you decide that, okay, to mitigate this set of risk, I want to choose a control from these standards. For example, ISO provides only one control on privacy. Whereas if you are working in a healthcare and your privacy is of paramount importance, so you have to adopt privacy control from HIPAA, which will replace this one privacy related control of ISO by X number of HIPAA controls. The same thing you can do for GDPR. You can replace the one privacy control with a set of GDPR control to fulfill requirement of GDPR. But the whole thing is driven by the management system, the same Plan, Do, Check Act, which has a built-in mechanism to see that the policies are followed, there are corrective actions needed. Make sure that corrective actions are implemented and your security posture, your risk management capability is increasing through this PDCA cycle. Next. So which one to choose? It's a very difficult question, and primarily it is driven by what your customer wants. But ideally, what would be the best approach, which we feel that to start with 27,001 because of various reasons. It gives you a baseline set of controls, only 140. If you want to adopt straight away NIST 853 and have to start with 200 plus controls only for low risk, at times it can be overwhelming for an organization. So start small with the 27,001. Then gradually, as you progress, you become more mature, and then you get into NIST cybersecurity framework. And what I was explaining some time back, the cybersecurity frameworks provides you multiple tiers where you grow up the maturity level on your risk management capability. And the PDCA cycle, which 27,001 established, will help you to go through the spiral of moving from tier 1 to tier 4. So this is an ideal scenario, but again, as I said in the beginning, that it is driven by your customer. If your customer demands you have to be NIST first and you choose to do that, by all means, you can do that. So to summarize, here are a few key words to remember. The ISO talks about leadership commitment. As you know, that unless your leadership is committed, nothing can be done. To implement a security management system in your organization, which Karen said some time back, it's not just IT. You need to coordinate across the organizations. You have to integrate processes across the organization. So unless it is sponsored by senior management, it is not going to happen. And then what follows after that senior management has to set objectives, have to enable you to plan to achieve the objectives, provide you necessary resource, competence, and any documentation needed. Other key word is the issues and requirements, which is starting at the business level. Then the next keyword is asset, which essentially determines the scope of your management systems. Which asset you want to protect determines everything about your security postures. Depending on the criticality of the asset, the location of the asset, you have to decide which system to put in and where. Then risk, which is the underlying foundation of any security assessment system, security management system. It is risk-based. And how you mitigate your risk by applying controls. And all said and done, no system will guarantee you that in spite of implementing all these best controls, you will never have any incidents. You have to have a monitoring systems because remember, the hackers are smarter than sometimes us. And they're always trying to outsmart the system we put in place. So every day we are identifying new vulnerabilities and new patches are coming out. So you have to keep running all the time to keep up with the system. So that leads to the measure and monitor your performance. Unless you have a good monitoring and measurement system, it's very hard to detect that something is going wrong in your system. You need to have internal audit, which is a key to any management system to check compliance to your own policies, and you have to have a continuous improvement system.
Okay, so if you're following along, this is Karen Rossen from the DESARA Group again. If you're following along, what in the workbook on the bottom of page 3, if you're already familiar with ISO 9001 and other standards that are like it, the bullets you'd fill in there would be documents and records. Both standards require it. They both require audits. They both require corrective action, change management, and the big difference is that ISO 27001 requires a formal risk management system which complements ISO 9001's requirements for risk-based thinking. So you should already be, if you've got 9001 in place, partially on your way there. And we talk about risks, and Subrata kept talking about the 114 controls. Well, they're divided into 14 domains, and each of the domains are listed here like supplier relationships or information security policies or operations security. There's too much to take in all at once. If they were just listed, here are 114 different things you can do to manage risk, you'd kind of be like, okay, where do I start? Well, working through identifying which assets, which information assets, what do you have that needs to be protected in terms of the information itself and the equipment that processes it, as well as the people who have access to the information. These 14 domains divide out the different actions you can take to control or to mitigate risks. And you calculate what your exposure to risk is and decide how much risk you can afford to take. Then you may apply additional controls or improve how robust the controls like these are. So we're going to go quickly through in the 20 minutes or so we have remaining before Q&A. We're going to go quickly through these and just give you a flavor for what each one means. And they're numbered according to Annex A of ISO 27001. Domain 5 is for information security policies. And just as Subrata said, you don't get anywhere without top management saying this is something that's important to us. This is how we intend to set about doing these things and the resources and so forth that will apply to it. So management has to establish a set of policies. This is what applying the controls within Domain 5, and there are 2 different controls in there, say that you have to do these things like follow relevant laws and regulations, meet business needs, including customer requirements. And Domain 6, another management-oriented domain, as opposed to getting into the nuts and bolts of the systems that you run on, is about organization of information security. And it says that you have to set up roles and responsibilities. And also it recognizes that in this day and age, we have remote workers, we have mobile devices. So within the 7 different controls that are covered in Clause 6, this is how do you make sure that the people and the responsibilities and so forth around using information systems are established. And I will ask Subrata to comment on some of these more technical ones in a minute, because my business partner, Dave Sanacola, is one of the ones who's prepared to answer a lot more questions on these. So let's see, Domain 7, human resources security. Think when you bring somebody into the company, you want to be sure that you're not infesting your organization with bad actors who are going to hack. So they look at signatures required for terms and conditions of employment, and how do you screen employees to be sure that they can be trusted around your information and your systems. There are, within the 6 different controls in Domain 7, there are requirements that you have all employees understand and abide by the policies and procedures. This would relate back to the clauses. Associated with Clause 7 that talk about awareness and competence of your employees. They're kind of mirrored in Domain 7 of the Annex A. So they have also requirements to protect assets following termination or change of employment. And I can almost always go, I shouldn't say almost always, I've gone into a number of companies that think they have robust processes for getting equipment and information back from people who have worked with them. And we can find leaks. We can find the one that got away. Often it happens with contractors for whom an individual manager may not have gotten a badge back or may not have gotten all the materials back that they're supposed to. Okay, Domain 8 on asset management. If you're going to figure out how to protect your assets, you have to start out, and there's a control that says one of the controls that we put over our system in order to reduce our risks of exposure are to figure out what are the assets we intend to protect. Each asset needs to have an owner, someone responsible for it. No orphan assets out there. And then you have to say how these assets are to be used and how they're to be returned back after they've been used. And assets need to be classified based on the risk associated with them. And in Clause 8, the 10 different controls within Clause 8 talk about the things that you have to do to handle your riskier assets with more controls than you would have over your more generic assets. So for example, information that's freely available on the web is going to have less control over it than information that contains, say, source code for your software products. So you would have different handling requirements over those assets that are more important to your business in terms of keeping secret and keeping other people's hands off of. And within domain 8, those 10 controls give you the requirements for, or they give you the broad general statements of what you have to do. And then you can go in using, for example, guidance that you gain from the NIST maturity model or from the follow-on documents in the other category, in the other documents of ISO 27000 series to say what specifically will we do for these assets. Domain 9 has 14 different controls in it that I've summarized in one sentence. It says ensure that people who need information, and only those people, have access to it. So a basic principle underlying ISO 27001 is distribute information on a need-to-know basis. I summarized that so simply there. Subrata, would you like to comment further on domain 9, the types of things that are included under asset control?
Absolutely. Thank you, Karen. And access control is the foundation of any security management system, you name it, under the sun. And people say any security professional will tell you that the only thing you need to control is access to ensure your information. So the access control here, what Karen says, it talks about when a new person joins or new user comes to your system, how you create their user access. Users should be classified based on their roles and responsibility, which is called role-based access control or need to know. It also addresses your access at multiple levels, that some employee may need only access to your email system and the time card system. Some employees may need to have some additional access to some databases. So database level, so access to your network, access to your databases, access to your applications. So it gives control to your control access at multiple levels in your information security system. It also says that how you authenticate, how you verify that somebody is trying to log in, he is the valid user. And this is called an authentication process. And this authentication could be as complex as multi-factor authentication to an as simple as just a login password. Carry on, Singh.
Okay, domain 10, cryptography. Another way to keep people's hands out of things they're not supposed to get into. And I would remind you to please go ahead and write the slide number if you have questions or want any more detail on these, because I'm going through very quickly, and even the things that Subrata adds, we're hoping that where you have questions, you'll post them and we'll get back to them. I already see one on that last one. So we'd like you to, cryptography says, how are you going to use encryption? And Dave went on and on about this one in our dry run. Subrata, will you address encryption?
So cryptography is an encryption in a way to provide a layer of security on top of the data which is being stored, instance, in a disk or being transmitted using any transport mechanism, be a wireless or wired network. There are different encryption protocols available here in the market, and based on your requirements, you adopt an appropriate encryption topology which is required for your business. There are some regulations around these encryptions. One regulation, it says that if you have an inter-country communication, if you're transmitting data from US to Europe or US to South America, your encryption must meet 256 bits encryption criteria. That's a minimum requirement.
Domain 11 on physical environmental security is probably the one that everybody in the business is already familiar with, to the extent that your company has some of these pieces already in place, and one that you have to socialize with everyone that's now important if you're pursuing ISO 27001. So for example, you may say that the control that your business has over casual display of information, clean screens, clear whiteboards, things like that, are required, and people kind of ignore it. You get certified and you make sure that people actually follow those, actually follow locking doors behind them, the no, what do they call it, no tag along through the door. Physical and environmental security goes into even where do you put your equipment so that if you've got a data center someplace, is it in a place that's likely to have an earthquake or a tornado? That would be a bad idea. You want it someplace where it's going to be protected and where bad actors don't have access to it. So Domain 11 has a number of controls in there. It has 15 different controls about how you keep the facilities, the physical environmental security of your information. And Subrat, I'm going to turn Domain 12 completely over to you because it's the stuff the IT guys get really deep into.
Absolutely. So Section 12, as you say from the title, it says Operation Security. It essentially means an IT operational security. It's a crux of the set of controls provided in 27001. It starts with change management, capacity management, then goes into monitoring mechanisms of you having event logs, how you monitor event log, how you audit your logs, then goes to vulnerability scanning, whether you need to do scans or penetration testings or patching, how often you do backups, how often you test your backups, so backup and recovery, then antivirus. So it's kind of a catch-all section where it provides a large number of security controls, which is primarily focused on IT operations in a company.
If you were to look at the parallel to this in ISO 9001, it's like where you're talking about having work instructions in production for those things that are most critical to making the product come off the end of the line properly. That's kind of the parallel to this because it gets into the nuts and bolts of how IT operates. Now, everyone these days is connected to a network somehow. It may be private within your company. It may be shared with your suppliers. It may be a global network. We do business over networks now. And within Domain 13, there are 7 different controls that talk about how do we make sure that our networks are secure, that bad actors are not able to, either intentionally or unintentionally on our company's part, to transfer information that we don't want to lose control of inside or outside the company, that we maintain that confidentiality, integrity, and availability at all times. These also are highly technical controls. Subrata, would you take Domain 14, System Acquisition, Development, and Maintenance, where there are another 13 controls written in this section?
Sure, Karen. And this is another section where if you are you have an in-house development and maintenance functions for the various applications used in the organization, or you're buying some off-the-shelf product, it emphasizes that for every product's requirement, when you identify, we tend to focus mostly on the functional requirements. Alongside the functional requirement, you also need to identify the security requirements that you are installing in applications which will be communicating with your office in Canada, and you'll be using public transport like internet. You don't have a dedicated line. So if you'll be transmitting data over internet, what like kind of security you need to have in place? So you may think about two-factor authentication. You can think about encryption using SSH or SSL configurations. So those all comes as a requirement. Once you design, you identify the requirement, then you have to build it in your design, go through the whole 9 years of design, development, deploy, and it says at the end, every product or every release it goes out to production has to go through a security testing. So in addition to your regular integration testing, system testing, user acceptance testing, there will be another layer of testing necessary for security. If you are testing your applications before release, if you're running a regression testing, you need a test data, and it also pays attention to the test data, that if you're using a production data for testing, your production data may contain some PII or EPHI, which is sensitive. So you need to have a process in place to sanitize production data before using it as a test data. So this is the whole section. If you are not into the system development and maintenance, it may not apply to you. But if you are in, this is a big area.
So it's making sure that you bake security into the products, the applications that you develop, right?
Exactly.
Okay. Domain 15 on supplier relationships. Many companies will be sharing information back and forth with their suppliers, and some of that may involve private information. For example, you may have payroll information going back and forth with ADP. How do you make sure that your suppliers are taking care of your information? Subrata, anything to add on domain 15, which has 5 controls in it?
The only thing I'd like to point out that this is an area which was often neglected. Traditionally, we say, "Oh, it is a purchasing function." But if we have go back, if you think about some of the most recent or severe security breaches which has happened, all came through the source of suppliers. Like somebody was able to penetrate your suppliers or subcontractor system. From there, it went to the main company which was hacked. So here they provided a lot of emphasis to make sure that you do a security risk assessment before you identify your supplier, before they come on board. Then you should have a periodic monitoring of the suppliers that they are maintaining their system which they have committed. And third thing that you have to ensure security of the entire supply chain, not your primary supplier. So many often in the large companies, there is a chain which goes through from the prime supplier to the tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 suppliers. So you have to ensure that all the security requirements, it flows through whatever level it flows down to.
And so that's why we can see that we're getting probably many companies, and this is why I suggested salespeople be on the line here, be in this webinar, is that you may be getting requests in contracts with, do you do this, do you do that, have you controlled for this? And all of those may be related to items that are already within ISO 27001. And if you say, hey, we're ISO 27001 certified, you kind of get a fast track towards the supplier, towards selling to your customers. And many of the, you may find more security requirements in your contracts because your customers are saying, we need to make sure our suppliers are protected. Domain 16 is about information security incident management. Now, if you have any other management systems in place, you've already got a corrective action system there. And when somebody comes up with something, an audit finding or a near miss of some kind, they go ahead and log it into the system, and it's open where everyone can look at it and work on it and be aware and pass the information around. Well, imagine if you find a leak in your information system. You find out there's a gaping hole that would allow hackers to get right into our stuff. We don't want to put that out there in everyone's hands so that everyone can see the doors unlocked and walk right through it. So information security management requires that within this control, it's not just a simple corrective action system like you may have around quality or some area where you get back to cause. You may have to get the data locked down, get an image of a disk, or get other kinds of information locked down and studied and find out exactly how this thing happened at a very different level secretly so that others can't exploit this so you initially respond you recover from the incident, and you also have to get to the cause. So these are one of the things that's required from this domain number 16, where there are 7 different controls, is that you actually learn from those incidents and improve your system. So it's a corollary to standard corrective action, but it's very specific to information security, recognizing that there's chain of custody and other types of issues related to researching information security incidents. Domain 17 is information security aspects of business continuity management. Remember, we talked about confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So many of us in our business continuity plans say, well, if we can't get into the office, we'll just work from home. Yes, but if all of the servers that you're using that your information is on are in the basement and the basement is flooded, you don't have much of a plan B. In fact, that was a situation with a business back in the early O's that I remember working with. They realized that all of their plans were across the flood zone that they couldn't get to. So ISO 27001, Annex A, Clause 17, Domain 17 asks you to ensure that you have the appropriate security even when things go wrong. So what you have to do is a formal process of identifying the requirements for your business. What is the minimum you can get along with for a certain amount of time, and then when do you execute plan B and plan C and so forth. And you have to keep that tested and up to date. It's not a one-time plan. Your auditors will look very carefully at it, and they'll look that you don't just have plan B, but that you've got plan C and plan D in those cases where it's particularly critical to the business. Within domain 17, there are 4 controls that address that, and there are whole standards that back up. Even though you can't get certified to them, there's an ISO standards family that would back that up into what you do for business continuity. In clause 18, I'll leave to the expert. Subrata, would you like to explain what compliance is all about in domain 18?
And this is where I was alluding some time back that if you have to comply with some regulations like HIPAA, SOX, GDPR, or PCI, this is the section which ensures that you comply to the appropriate regulations. In addition to that, it also have some controls which requires you to implement that you need to protect confidentiality in any way, regardless of whether you have a HIPAA or SOX. Confidentiality is a big deal. So whether you get non-disclosure agreements signed by your employees, contractors, or suppliers, how you protect the intellectual property IP of various parties involved in your business deal, how you ensure privacy of your own employees. That's where I was referring to, that the one control can be replaced by the whole GDPR control if you have to comply with GDPR. And other element of this, it says that how do you make sure you should have your internal mechanism to make sure that you're complying to all these applicable regulations. So it is typically done by your internal audit. You may be going through some extra audits, that audit by your customers, or SOX audit, or HIPAA audit, whatever. So these are the various audits and assessments mechanism which requires to make sure that your compliance to applicable policies and procedures. So that's all about compliance.
So the point of controls is that we apply them to protect against known vulnerabilities and add an extra layer of control over the highly confidential assets. We've got redundant controls so that you're not just expecting to lock the windows, but you also lock the doors and put up some bars and maybe have a tripwire across there that you're going to keep the bad guys out. The whole point is to keep people out of our information and make sure that it stays those people who aren't supposed to be in there, and make sure that the information integrity remains and that it's available. The whole point of those controls, those 114 controls, is to reduce the risks associated with our products and our information that we use within the business. Now, it looks like we might run a few minutes overtime, but the next section we're going into is about implementing, and this is what the DESARA Group does, where we work with a company to reduce the amount of time and the number of rework steps that it takes to actually get through implementing ISO 27001 or using the NIST framework. And there are 3 phases, as you see: planning, implementation, and certification. In the planning phase, it starts with getting management on board. Is this something we really want to do? And if pursuing a certification, implementing a management system is important, then management is going to allocate the resources and put a project charter out there and identify one member of management who's the executive sponsor, who will make sure that enough core team members, that would typically be, say, 6 to 12 people who are in those core positions of IT and leadership and HR and legal and so forth, that would be the team leaders and keep their departments in alignment with ISO 27001 requirements. In the planning phase, we train that core team, develop the statement of applicability, which regulations and which controls apply to our company, and plan the project. When DESARA implements that with a company, we do that in a 5 to 8 day launch workshop. If we go to 8 days, it allows us to work with small groups and get a lot of the preparatory work done. If it's 5 days, it's more of a core dump, and then you go off and do the work yourself. Once we've established the baseline, where are we, what do we intend to apply, then we go into the implementation phase, and this is where those 114 controls get actually defined and implemented within the business, and you're creating the system documentation. All of those controls are applied based on an identification of your assets, what risks are associated with them, and what do you need to do to prevent or mitigate against those risks should they happen. During the implementation phase, you get everyone on the train with you to protect information, and you begin exercising that incident management system. It would be really tough to implement ISO 27001 in anything but the least complex system in less than a year. So we recommend that clients bite off a chunk of their management system to bring under the umbrella of information security that they can do within a year to a year and a half. If it gets longer than that, you almost begin chasing your tail. So you could start with one scope and expand it to other areas afterwards. Phase 3 is certification. You go through internal audits, which the DESARA Group can help with, because often you can't train enough internal auditors on a new standard to do everything that's needed. But you go through your internal audits and your management review, and then it's turned over to the certification body. You don't begin working with them at the end, but they wouldn't come in and actually visit your business until after you've gotten through your internal audits management review and you've said you're ready to go. So I'll turn it over to Subrata to talk about how DQS will certify your company. And I know we've just hit the top of the hour. Those of you who can stay, this will just be another not more than 5 minutes.
Yeah, we'll go through it quickly, and it's pretty similar. Anyone who has gone through any ISO certification process, it's the same standard process where you have to fill out an online application form. Once you complete the online application form, so the sales team will get back to you with a sales proposal. And once you agree to the proposal, then we have to sign a contract for the audit. Once the contract is signed, then we have to plan for your audits. And the audits are done in a 2 phase. The first one is called a stage 1 audit, which is actually a document review just to make sure that your company is ready for stage 2 audit. We'll look into your policies and procedures to see whether you have addressed all the requirements of the standards adequately. You have done a risk assessment, you have done 1 round of internal audit, and 1 round of management review. These 3 are the readiness criteria. Once you're found ready, you go to the stage 2, which is the actual audit, where the auditor will try to verify that you're following your documented policies and procedures through verifying evidences. Now, once you are certified, you're recommended for certification, you get an ISO certificate for 3-year validity. But every year you have to go through a surveillance audit. So surveillance is a spot check of your system. We do some samples. So typically we tend to spend 30% of the effort spent on your actual certification audit in surveillance. Some mandatory items will be always audited, like management review, measurement reports, and improvement, risk assessment, and we sample the controls. On the 3rd year, you will be due for recertification. So once you recertify it, you again get a certificate with 3-year validity.
Okay.
The audit experience, we like to say the ISO 27000 audit is a very technical audit. It's very different from a 29000 or 14000 audit. Here, auditor must have technical competency to get into your Active Directory, your network router, to verify you have the right patches or right access provided. This is the value which we will bring to the organizations where we have auditors who are highly competent in the technology area as well as the security frameworks. And everywhere we audit, that's how we add value to the organization. We identify some patches in the network routers or the servers which are supposed to be implemented, and their internal IT or the network security team has missed somehow. And this is something our organizations appreciate the value from our audit.
In fact, if I could add on to that, DQS is, as you saw from the history of it, a very has a long history over 75 years. It was 1850s, I believe it was founded. Their reputation and their accreditation as a certification body is the kind of thing you want to look out for when you're choosing a certification body and when you're evaluating suppliers who may be certified to ISO 27001. You certainly don't want to fully trust a certification if it's by somebody who's not accredited, such as an accounting firm. You'd want to be sure that they've actually gone through the level of rigor that is required for an accredited certification. And you can see that DQS is available throughout the globe. I know we're just about out of time. These are the kinds of marks you look for to be sure they're out there. Finally, a little bit about DESARA and our role. We do not work hand in hand with DQS. It's important that we maintain our independence, but we've done this for 20 plus years in the industry, helped dozens of implementation teams achieve certifications. And the point of working with a consultant is not that you get a free ride, a fair pass just because you used a consultant, but rather because it reduces your time and expense, ensures your first time audit acceptance with minimal nonconformances. These auditors are sharp, they find things, but basically what DESARA Group's aim is to help you get the most out of your implementation process that you can so that you can build and continually improve. We did have some questions come in, and we'll move on to answering those, but I just wanted to mention that one of the questions was one of the questions was about, do we offer are we getting some feedback there? One of the questions was, do we offer a set of documents, policies, procedures that you can build on? No, what we recommend is that you study these standards, and you'll find ourselves, DQS, other companies will have webinars and free information, but also get the in-depth in-house training or virtual classroom training that the DESARA Group offers, and then do your self-assessment and objective setting. When you get into implementation, it's very important that you don't just try to slap someone else's documents on top of your ways of doing business just for a certificate. You need to go through these policies and develop what is our intent? How do we really work around here and get full buy-in? So yes, when DESARA consults, we start with baseline documents to work with, but we would never hand over a stack of documents and say, here's a template, change the name, do this, and you'll be fine. It really is important that you build that from what's important to your own group. And we had another question as well. This was from Barbara, and she asked, when we were talking about control number, domain number 9, I believe, on access control differentiates between whether you have read access, read-write access, read-write delete, or adding to a file. That's what access control means. Specifically, what is a person allowed to do with the information that they are allowed to access? It can be as specific as makes sense for your company. And I have another question that just came in from David. It says, what portion of federal agencies have adopted ISO 27001 as a procurement qualification? Subrata, do you have some information about that? I know you live in the DC area.
Yes, I know, and we have been working with many contractors, basically, who are the technologies provided to the federal government and defense. And one of the prerequisites these days, we are seeing that it used to be 9,001, but they're more and more adding 27,001 and 20,001 as a prerequisite.
Okay. Another question that just came in, and I know other people have asked, or will there be an email of the slides? Right there at the top on the chat screen, there's a link you can go to right now and download the slides if you'd like to, particularly important if you couldn't view the slides. We didn't include those in the webinar link, but you'll get the link to the slides and the link to the replay of this webinar within 24 hours. And with that, I know we're over time, but any closing remarks you'd like to make, Subrata?
No, I'd like to thank everyone for taking this time and apologize for this technology issue that some of you is not able to view our slides, but I hope it will be helpful.
Okay, thank you again, everyone, for coming. We will be offering this again this afternoon. You can invite your friends to come to that one. And please watch your email for additional communications from the DESARA Group and from DQS that may help you along your journey to information security management systems. See you soon, and bye for now.